taking a subject matter that's a bit more complicated. There's a lot to sort through, leave out, maybe move around slightly. Now, the subject in this lesson is going to be a crowded garden scene. That's the subject we're going to be looking at, and it could be anything that's cluttered and crowded that we have to sort through, simplify, make decisions on what to leave in and what to leave out. And also looking at values and shapes before we get started, making some decisions mentally. All this is geared towards helping us not just copy what we see and end up with just a real cluttered, busy looking painting that's hard to navigate through and hard to see any depth or distance. So I have several here to pick from. And again, it could be a street scene. It could be a backyard that's very cluttered. Anything that you have to sort through and work on simplifying. These garden scenes are in Greece on a trip I made there. And the first thing I want to do, of course, when I'm taking the photograph, I'm taking it because I think it makes a good composition. So composition is always the first thing. And some of them need to be cropped, maybe redesigned a little bit, or redesigned just because you want to redesign them. Have different ideas in mind about what you want to do with the subject. So we're not tied to the photograph compositionally or shapes or anything else, or especially detail. So when I look at this, I always want to really identify right off the bat which way the light's coming from. And this is coming from a little bit from on top. It's probably about 10 in the morning or so, maybe 10:30. So I know as I'm simplifying, like this tree here, the light's always going to be on that side for the most part. And at the top over to the side a little bit. So really simplify where the light's coming from. It sounds like a simple thing, but a lot of times we jump into painting a photograph not real conscious of what direction the light's from. And then when we step back and look at it, we've got light coming from many different directions. So make sure that you really organize your thoughts about where light's coming from. Then I want to decide how many layers I want to create. So here I've got a foreground layer that goes to about here. Maybe I'll include this one too. So all that is the foreground. Then a second layer of background in there, and then maybe a third, and then I'll probably have a fourth poking through these areas in here. So I want 4 layers, and that helps me push everything into one of those layers. That way I don't have a bunch of individual little objects scattered everywhere. Everything is shoved into the 3 or 4 different layers, and they all take on the value of that layer. So that in the photograph here, the lights back in here are about the same as here. But they won't be in the painting because this area is, I don't know, maybe the 3rd layer back in there. Really think through layers of the photograph and how you want to separate them. And we'll separate them by value and color temperature. Of course, warmer, brighter colors in front, and they gradually get more muted back in here, here, and back in there. So in the background, maybe a lot more blue than any other color, a little more muted than up front. And the darks are not as dark, and lights are maybe a hair lighter, but definitely cooler and more muted. I went ahead and did some work on this on the photograph in Photoshop, just to work through those ideas. I do this some. And I always do a thumbnail along with it, but you can see here, this is where the first layer is. And then I've got a second layer, third, and then a fourth. And the fourth is poking through to give that sense of depth in there. And it's very muted blue-green. The blue-green might even represent kind of the yellow-green in the background. So really simplifying, and you can see I'm creating a lot more temperature here, especially in the background, than the photograph does. A lot cooler here than here, and as it goes back, it gets even cooler yet. So really think through those layers and the value changes and temperature changes in there. This is the photograph. There's a lot there to work with, and I want to simplify it to there. You can see the darks getting lighter. Darkest here, next darkest there, then here and back here, and finally there's no darks in the background. And that progression is what sets up the depth, because remember, we're working on a flat canvas. So busy, but there's a lot there to work with. There's a lot there I can simplify. The photograph always has that choppy feel of small little brush strokes that kind of go like this, all this small leaves on all the trees, but really resist that. You might have it in one spot in an area that you want to stick out the most, but tiny little brush strokes really draw your attention. You got to be real careful with them that they don't kill an area with too much detail or kill the whole painting with too much detail. Now the next one here, the sun's the same area. Sun was kind of coming and going, but there's enough sunlight there. It's kind of hazy, but enough sunlight that I can push the contrast and still make it a fairly bright sunny day. I don't have to go with cloudy day because there is enough direct sunlight there to push it over. And here I've got a real strong sidewalk that leads you back right away. I have no desire to paint the figure back there at all, because it's about this area in here more than anything else. Trees are kind of the main focal point with the greens and the flowers around it. So I want to decide what's going to be left out. Didn't mean to do that yet. How I'm going to simplify. I want to get the layers in there. Maybe layer-wise, I'm going here as first layer, second layer, and then a third, and then a fourth back in here. So go ahead and layer it, and everything fits into one of those 3 or 4 layers. And again, the values are going to get darker as they come forward and lighter as they go back. So my changes here, you can see the greens gradually getting more and more blue as they recede. Now we're not looking at flowers right now, but the greens, more yellow greens, some warm greens. Then it turns to a blue-green and then a muted blue back in the distance. And just a gray blue way back in here. So the more I can simplify, the better. And then I always relate color-wise, color to color. So if I have violet flowers, I would want them stronger here and a little more muted back in here. I don't have that. I didn't mute them. Should have and would with the painting, just so there's a subtle change. They would both look sunlit. This would look sunlit and that would look sunlit, but there'd be a little bit of somehow making it cooler in the background. Even if it's just a touch more white, that's going to make that violet cooler. Or maybe a bit more blue and white. But somehow there has to be a little bit of change. And the photograph's not going to give you that. The photograph won't give you these kind of planes. Here I've got pretty much one plane here, another plane here, another one there, and so on. Of course, the tree, this is part of the foreground plane or layer. It's just that as things go back, they have to change value. So I think of them in terms of layers of value. The lights being a stronger layer in front and a little bit more muted, slightly cooler as they go back. Darks being darker in front, the layers, and then the layers get lighter and cooler as they go back. And I'm thinking here in terms of what I can mix with the palette or the colors on my palette, not necessarily what the photograph gives me. Sometimes the photo does a good job of giving you ideas of color, but never feel tied to it, even if it looks good. The more you paint, the more you realize what you can mix with the colors on your palette. And we're trying to suggest light instead of just copy the photograph. And I think the paint does that better than the photograph. So don't get caught up with matching color in the photograph, especially matching value. Values can really be off in a photograph. In this one, the darks way back in, right back here, are just as dark as these little darks It is bigger darks in here. If not even darker, the background is in the photograph. And that just doesn't work in our painting. We have to lighten up and pull stuff together. So I don't want to be enamored with all the little dots and dashes of color and value change. Even a lot of these tree trunks, I want to get rid of them. These are the two main trunks here that I want to focus with. Maybe that third one back in there. See what I did. I might not have. Yeah. Those three, and then maybe a fourth one way back in there. But the ones back in here are very simple. Just have one in here. So I've got 4, 5. I've got 5 trunks in here. And the photograph has, I don't know, maybe twice that many. So really simplify. Be really conscious of the light direction. And create layers where you're creating that feeling of depth by each successive layer gets lighter as it recedes and cooler. And again, despite what the photograph gives you. I'm going to focus on composing, getting the drawing down, and start blocking in those layers. And then handling enough detail or adding enough detail that makes it interesting without overdoing it.